All right, welcome on back to the lectures. We are now entering into Unit 2, which we will start by covering the Persians a little bit more and a little bit on the Greeks, because they're obviously going to fight the Persians, and then we're going to get into Alexander, and then we'll be off to Rome. So it's a very big unit. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about, so let's talk about the Persian Empire. Now, the Persian Empire, they come from east of Mesopotamia in modern Iran. And they're part of a group that actually helped the Babylonians overthrow the Assyrians. And we talked about a group called the Medes who teamed up with Babylon to overthrow Assyria. Well, the Medes will then turn into basically, they get conquered by the Persians and turn into the Persians. And from then on, we kind of think of them as one group and then off to the races with the Persian Empire. And guys, this is the biggest empire that we talked about this far. It's an enormous empire that stretches over 1,000 miles. They're faced with a lot of logistical issues trying to govern a region that large. And if you keep up with what we've been doing in this course, I think it's helpful here. Kind of thinking about Mesopotamia and everything that we've covered, that the Persian homeland is basically new to us in this course, and typically a little bit further east than what we would normally think of, for Western Civ, historically speaking. But the Persians interact so much with the rest of the cultures that we've been talking about. They do demand some of our attention as well in this lecture. So we're really going to start here with a man named Cyrus the Great. And this slide here is just kind of give you an idea of how big the Persian Empire is. And he's technically Cyrus the second, but everyone calls him Cyrus the Great because, historians have such really creative nicknames. So here is yet again another great. And of course, he's got some reason to be called great. He is a brilliant leader. And I'm not going to lie, Cyrus is kind of my boy here. I mean, Cyrus is one of my favorite figures in ancient history. I think Cyrus is... Oh, hold on. Sorry. Cyrus is pretty terrific. He's a brilliant military man. He's a brilliant strategist. He carves out an enormous empire. That map I just showed you was most of Cyrus's doing. He's very clever. He uses a system called satraps or satrapies. Now, a satrap is like a governor, and a satrapy is kind of like a district or state, if you want to put it that way. So Cyrus has this enormous region to govern, and he'll do that by saying, okay, I'm going to put a satrap, and then I'm going to put another one, and then another one, and we're going to just kind of build this empire of satrapies. And I'll put one here in Susa and Elam. I'll put one in Babylon, and I'll put one here in Egypt. And, he doesn't actually conquer Egypt. His son does, but you get the point. He's going to put them here and here and here and here and here. And you see what we're kind of doing here. And so it's his way of governing this enormous territory, because he basically goes and he says, hey, I go to a Persian. I'm going to make you governor, the satrap, and you're going to answer directly to me, right? And you have local authority, and so I want you to go and appoint like mayors, basically, of these smaller cities. So you have the satrap, and then the satrap answers to Cyrus, and then so if you were to really line it up, it goes Cyrus, and then the satrap, and then the local guy, whoever that is. And because as you conquer, it seems to allow these people to kind of go around as business as usual. You kind of keep the same guy in charge, but he kind of reports down the line. He doesn't really have much bearing on your individual life. And so you're kind of given this local autonomy. And it's very clever. He also, Cyrus that is, showed a great respect for conquered people and religions and traditions. At least to, see him write about it. Cyrus does not allow his soldiers to burn everything to the ground. He doesn't allow them to, sort of rape and pillage like most empires and armies have been doing. He shows remarkable respect for people. He treated conquered people remarkably well. And then he ultimately dies in battle in 530 BC. So Cyrus is really one of the good ones. Now, stop for a second and put your thinking cap on. And imagine that you've just been conquered by Cyrus, right? And your grandfather and your father have told you stories about the Assyrians and the Babylonians. And here comes another big bad empire, right? So you're probably thinking, oh, great, more of the same. Think about what the Assyrians have done to your grandfather and, his people. And what they did when they were rebelled, they impaled them and flayed them alive and all these terribly nasty things. And the Babylonians basically do the same thing. And here comes Cyrus. It's like, no, no, no. Guys, keep your gods. In fact, I'll adopt them into my pantheon. You know, I'm a polytheist. I can have more gods, right? No, no, just relax. My soldiers aren't going to hurt you. You've already been defeated. That's the end of it. In fact, you know what? Hey, you guys are Jews? Okay. You're the Jews that Nebuchadnezzar brought here, right? I'm going to send you back. Yeah, go ahead. Go rebuild your temple. You need some money? Here's some money. I mean, Cyrus is the guy who actually allows the Jews to go back home at the last bit of the Old Testament. I mean, the book of Esther is set in the Persian court, for example. And it's Cyrus who says, go back, rebuild the temple to the God in Jerusalem. And so he doesn't just say these things. I mean, he kind of walks the walk. And you go, okay, well, maybe it's just propaganda. He's trying to make himself look good. But yeah, but maybe. But there's also a pretty hefty dosage of that. But he really backs it up. He even funds some of these things. So from a guy, like I said, he's kind of from a guy who, you know, is a breath of fresh air. It doesn't look like anything that people are used to. Now, if you rebel, he's still going to deal harshly with you, but he's not the Assyrians. Cyrus decides that way of doing things didn't really work very well. And so people are always dealing with rebellions, obviously, but I want to make you clear that you don't need to rebel. It's pretty nice, you know, like Cyrus is going, hey, why would you rebel? You know, just keep things in line and it's going to go well for you. You know, just keep doing what you're doing. It's going to be great. You know, just aren't you glad to be a Persian? So again, there's the map here. Now, the most remarkable event from his reign is when he captures Babylon. And he fights a battle at a place called Opus along the riverside city on the Tigris north of Babylon. He routs the Babylonian army. And according to both his own accounts and later Greek historian Herodotus, who were just now about up on the life of, you know, like, and we've referenced him a few times. Cyrus conquers Babylon without any real resistance. And he explains, you know, Herodotus does, that he accomplishes this feat by diverting the Euphrates River into a canal. So the water drops off to a level about the height of the middle of your thigh. And this allows the army to just walk in under the wall and not drown in the river. Because it's only up to their thighs. And they take the city at night, open the gate, and boom. Cyrus takes Babylon, and everyone rejoices because the Babylonian king, Nabonidus, is not even there. He's out worshiping the moon in the desert. So Cyrus then says, look, Marduk has given me your city. I love Marduk. Let's all be happy. And he ends up saying that his piety before the God that allowed Cyrus to conquer so easily, and he goes on to talk about how he's going to restore temples and that have been destroyed in the wars in previous generations. And he sends people like the Jews home. And basically this text that they find is considered to be one of the first human rights charters in a sense because of that. And so it's really, really interesting for that purpose. And you're actually going to read that kind of yourself. Anyways, on to his capital city, Parsegard. It's built along a river in the mountainous region, which we're going to look at here on the next slide, but it's a very humble capital. Very humble. And actually, this is his tomb, and this is really interesting. And I think we need to look at his tomb. I think there's certain things that stand out. It's not a grand pyramid, right? It's not this big, ostentatious, loud, overly dramatic display of wealth. You know, it's kind of humble and quaint and cute. And, you know, like, it tells us something about the man. He didn't waste state resources on lavish, massive tomb. What about the condition it's in? It's in really good condition. And I think this suggests that people that came after him had enough respect that they don't loot or vandalize or otherwise attack his tomb. It's like that Cyrus says, you know, don't mess with Cyrus, you know. And I get a kick out of this, you know, this depiction of Cyrus the Great at the Olympic Park in Sydney, Australia from the year 2000. Why show this? Because, like I said, Cyrus becomes part of the narrative of Western Civ through this, his tolerance and his treatment of others. He's a breath of fresh air. And so, you know, that kind of spirit is kind of keeping with the global idea behind the Olympics. And they actually celebrate him all the way in Sydney, Australia. So it's a pretty impressive legacy. Now, unfortunately, that's all the time we really have for Cyrus. But please note that this guy really changes the way that empires treat people, at least for a few rulers. And he's a pretty awesome ruler. Now, after he dies, the throne passes to his son Cambyses. Note the dates here, not because I'm going to quiz you, but they should tell you a little bit of a problem here. You take a guy who's basically universally loved to his son who only rules for 8 years. Now, what happened? He mysteriously dies. We're not sure why. The throne ends up passing on to Darius, who is actually not of royal blood. I want to make sure that you understand that. He's not of royal blood. It is not his throne to take. But he's not next in line for the blood. And he's not even in the immediate family. He's not a son of Cyrus or a brother of Cyrus or anything like that. He's a kid, basically. He thinks maybe like his second cousin. So there's some debate about what the relationship actually was, but he takes the throne. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to put two and two together and question whether Darius or Darius has anything to do with it, but we simply don't know. But Cambyses' main claim to fame is his short rule, and he brings Egypt into the empire. And while there, we have another conversation that just, is interesting. And this is pure legend for a long time, and it definitely has its legendary elements. But when he's conquering Egypt, the oracle of Amun-Ra at the Siwa Oasis claimed that it would be doom and gloom and that Tertia was going to fall, and it prophesied bad things for Cambyses. So naturally, Cambyses says, I'm not going to let it get away with that. You're not going to tell me what I can and can't do. So he sends a massive army of 50,000 men halfway across the desert. And when they get into the middle of the desert, a massive sandstorm springs up and buries them all. Now, Herodotus is the one who tells this story. So the numbers are hard to believe in because it's just absurd. But for a long time, it's just that. It's just all legend, right? It's a story about how, the oracle of Amun-Ra, and the gods defend Egypt and, don't mess with the desert, right? I mean, obviously, there's a lot of Egyptian pride sort of behind the story that involves divine intervention. But now you have these Italian archaeologists who have actually just uncovered in the middle of the desert some skeletons in Persian gear, right? So like Persian armor on and everything. And it makes everybody go, wait a minute, what are they doing out there? And Siwa was an oasis, right? It's their story that Herodotus is referencing. And so you need to understand something about the way that Herodotus goes about interviewing people. And that's his credit. He's one of the first people that basically works and does this. And he kind of writes down these histories. And this is kind of heading into the 400 BC. And Herodotus is a serious guy, but he doesn't have the kind of methodology we have today for history. So he's kind of the grandfather of the idea of history. And later we're going to get a Greek who does a much better job with real writing of history, who's called the father of scientific history. But for now, Herodotus is kind of the grandfather. And he goes around and interviews people, and he asks them about their stories from their past, and he writes them down. And he'll even say in some cases, they told me this, I don't really know if it's true. But we talked about how exaggerated his account was about the walls of Babylon, right? So the Persian army, he gets this story and he tells the story, and the numbers are almost certainly exaggerated. But then archaeologists find these bones and Persian equipment, and it's like, well, maybe this is an important turning point here, because I think that this is what the ancients do. They take things that happened and exaggerate them. They don't take things that they never know happened and pretend like they did happen unless they're making a myth. But even then, they mythologize history, but they do not historicize myth. In other words, they'll exaggerate what happens in the past, but they don't pretend that fiction is truth. And so this is what happens here. I think that they told the story and it made it look even bigger and better. And, probably sends, one contingent of the army. Yeah, that's a monkey, Macy. Sorry, everyone. She had to tell me there was a monkey. And so the story, he may have sent one army contingent out there to Egypt, but it blows up into like 50,000 people. So it's important to see how history kind of works like that. So it's just kind of a fun side note. Now this takes us to Darius. Now, interestingly enough, Darius the First is also Darius the Great, right? Obviously not creative. He is a kinsman of Cyrus, but again, not next in line, not royal blood to the extent that he's supposed to be the next one on the throne. But he has many, many claims of fame. He conquers northwest India. His empire is now stretched to nearly 2,000 miles. And under Cyrus, it was at 1,000, now closing in on 2,000. Guys, this is like from San Francisco to New York. I mean, it's an enormous empire considering their technology and the things they had to deal with. It's very difficult to govern. He extends Cyrus's ideas of satraps into having 23 of them. Sorry. So you have 23 of these satraps spaced out evenly throughout the empire, and so Darius is actually really good at what you might think of as administration and logistics. He just gets stuff done. He's got 7 different ethnic groups that he governs. He manages to make all languages understandable to his officials, and he adds security measures and tries to keep people from rebelling, which they haven't done a ton of yet, but they will in just a minute. He builds a brand new capital at Persepolis, as well as the royal roads. And now you've heard about the Roman roads. Roman roads get a lot of love, but they're pretty much, good roads for ancient roads. But the Roman roads are basically built on top of the Persian roads, which are more or less built on smaller roads that people have been using for thousands of years. But the royal road is a lot like an interstate for the ancient world, and the royal road is also equipped with, little service stations. Like, if you think of it like every 15 or so miles in distance, you could push a horse or ride a horse that far in that climate, and they basically would send messengers, and they would stay at these little estates, these places, and then leave the next morning. It's basically like the ancient Pony Express, and it's all part of his massive empire. He also starts numerous building projects, irrigation projects. It's a number of incredible things, projects that he's involved with. He ends up with 18 children. His successor, Xerxes, the son, who's the eldest son of his first wife, and then he makes Xerxes technically the grandson of Cyrus the Great, because he does marry into Cyrus. His family does, Darius anyways. He's really a usurper, though. He stole the throne here, and he's going to marry Cyrus's daughter to legitimize his rule. So let's talk quickly about the capital that he builds at Persepolis. Now, here's the top plan from an archaeological ruin. You can see wherever you get an archaeological top plans like this, and you get these nice lines all over the place, that tells you it's a really well preserved. So, it's really, really well, and you're looking at this whole site is actually quite stunning and quite beautiful. And what's really amazing is because if you look at this plateau, you have to understand this is actually only half real plateau and half artificial plateau. In other words, Darius sees this beautiful site, and he says, I'm going to build my capital here. And so his engineers, his builders come up and say, okay, sounds awesome. This is really nice. We got fresh water, a beautiful view. This is a great place to build your capital and have all the foreign dignitaries come and grovel at your feet, your majesty. And he says, great. Only problem, guys, it's not big enough. And I want my capital city to be much, much bigger. And they're like, okay, well, if you want it to be a lot bigger, you're going to just have to find another plateau. It's not going to be here, And Darius says, well, actually, it's going to be here. So what I want you to do is I want you to build the earth up around this plateau to make it big enough. So build another plateau right next to this one. And then connect them, and we're going to put the capital on top of it. And believe it or not, that's what they actually do. They get boulders from the adjacent mountains, and they get as big of boulders as they can. They anchor them with a bunch of rock chains, and they fill it in with dirt, and these boulders provide heavy anchor points so that the soil can rest and the looser rock doesn't erode away. And they basically build up this giant plateau to match the naturally occurring one. And so these people are terraforming. They terraformed in the 5th century BC. They're extremely impressive. And, the ancients are really anything but dumb, especially when it comes to architecture and building. Now, at Persepolis, there is these beautiful reliefs. They're called the Procession of Nations, which shows different groups bringing in exotic goods to trade and spoil the king, to stay on his good side. And this is a really good excavation photo. So, when you're an archaeologist, you kind of dig from the top down, of course, and you clean the walls, and you're trying to have these nice layers, like a 7-layer cake or something like that. And you want to be able to look at the cross sections from different time periods. And then one day you're digging and you come across this. Wow, what a game changer, right? It's like the find of the century. It's almost like Tutankhamun's tomb, right? It's an absolute dream scenario. And here's Darius, and here are people bringing their trade goods. The Persian dignitary who's telling them, hey, you got some people here with some stuff. They want to talk to you. And they find these beautiful reliefs in the Persian Empire here at Persepolis. Now, unfortunately, the lessons of Cyrus don't last as long as we'd like. Xerxes, the son of Darius, tries to impose Persian values on conquered lands. Okay, red flag. If you want to know what happened to the Persian Empire, Well, they forgot the powerful thing that the Persian Empire was founded on, which was tolerance. And when you start imposing your own Persian values, you're going to start dealing with more rebellions. And Mesopotamia and Egypt both rebel, and that's bad news because those are the breadbaskets of the empire. And then there's a big war with Greece, and that's a whole nother lecture, in this module. But the Persian rulers really deal with, also assassinations. Some are successful, and Alexander ends up defeating them. So they really forgot what really made them great. And so you need to listen and understand that's a very potent point right there. All right, to wrap up this video, we're going to talk about Zoroastrianism. And this is based on the teachings of a man named Zarathustra. And he taught that there were not multiple deities, that there's really only two. There's Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord Spirit and creator of good, and his opposite, Angra Mainyu, who is destructive and hostile spirit, also like the bad. So it's dualistic, good deity, bad deity, equal footing, and they're fighting in a war, whichever man, and whichever one is man. Men are loyal to their husbands, so we can ensure that people win this war. So it's a universal message. Many people claim that it's kind of one of the first, but it's one of the first precursors to Christianity, but really it's not. Ancient Judaism was supposed to be universal as well, but the Jews weren't very good at spreading their religion to their neighbors. So Zoroastrianism is definitely universal, and you don't have to be a certain ethnicity to believe that others think that it is similar to Christianity. And I would submit that it's not, because God and Satan are not equal footing, right? They're not equal powers. Christians teach that God is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, and Satan is none of those things. So it may sound a bit similar when you look at Ahura Mazda, and you talk a little bit more about it in the coming lectures, but it's not. And so that's enough for now, and we'll pick up with the Persian-Greek wars in the next section.